A huge story has just come out about Kawhi Leonard and the Los Angeles Clippers allegedly having an under-the-table agreement to pad Kawhi's salary while circumventing the salary cap. This was reported by Pablo Torre. His investigation found that Kawhi signed a $28 million endorsement deal with a fraudulent tree planting company that was funded by none other than Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Clippers. If this is proven true, there could be dire consequences for the Clippers organization, and it completely recontextualizes Kawhi's time in LA. So let's talk about it. Hello everybody, welcome to Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel. We're trying to hit 150k subs over here, so it would be much appreciated. We are also available over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you'd like to enjoy this as an audio-only experience. So first, I want to cite an example of something like this that actually happened before about 25 years ago. So let's do a brief history lesson. In 1999, Joe Smith was a pretty highly sought-after free agent big man. He was drafted number 1 overall in the 1995 draft by the Golden State Warriors. In the 211 games that he suited up for the Dubs, he averaged 17 points per game, 9 rebounds, and 2 stocks. But his impact was a little bit lesser than those numbers would suggest, so he was shipped off to the Philadelphia 76ers, where he struggled quite a bit. As a result, he entered 1999's free agency class completely unrestricted. But because his rough stint with Philadelphia was just over the course of 30 total games, and he was just 22, 23 years old, he was still believed to have a ton of potential. But for some reason, he signed to the Minnesota Timberwolves for merely $1.75 million over 1 year, a deal substantially under market value at the per year rate, and pretty shocking that he would get a 1-year deal on top of that. But this did allow the Wolves a ton of flexibility to add to the roster in other ways, so it could be justified as him just being a team player. After 1 year with Minnesota, where he put up, again, pretty solid counting stats, he again signed for a 1-year deal, this time for $2.1 million. Again, pretty puzzling. Then a pair of agents had a falling out, resulting in a ton of lawsuits, which Joe Smith and the Timberwolves ended up getting caught up in, and it revealed the nature of the agreement between Minnesota and Joe. As it turned out, the Wolves planned to give Joe 2 straight 1-year deals to gain his bird rights so they could then sign him to a far more lucrative $86 million deal for his 3rd-year contract. After this was found out by the league office, Joe's bird rights were voided. The Wolves were fined a then NBA record $3.5 million, and then the biggest punishment of all, at least in terms of the future of the organization, they had 5 first-round picks taken away. 5. Eventually, they were given back their 2003 draft pick, but still, this caused massive amounts of damage for an organization with a budding superstar in Kevin Garnett. The Wolves did start winning by the time that this punishment happened, so it's not like they missed out on multiple lottery picks, but still, 4 first-rounders could have garnered so much more help around KG. It would have helped a lot more than the extra cap flexibility having Joe Smith as cheap as he was. They did this for a guy in Joe Smith who would average 10 points, 6 rebounds, and 1.1 blocks as a Timberwolf. I used an article by Sean Hyken for some of the research on this part, and he put it plainly in the article, saying if an NBA team planned to sign a player to an illegal contract that could cost them a ton of money in future draft picks, they'd better be sure the player is worth it. That's a risk you take to bring in a superstar, a franchise-changing player who can make you a title contender. That's not a risk you take for Joe Smith. Yeah, that's pretty much the size of it. Hard to say it better than that. I also want to point out, as a side note, a funny little detail about all of this is the first draft that Minnesota was denied their 1st-round pick was in the year 2000, and the 2000 draft just so happened to be hosted in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's just hilarious. An interesting quote that Sean included in his article came from Kevin McHale, who was the GM of the Timberwolves at the time. He said there are 8 to 10 teams that do this all the time. They're just good at it and we're bad. And that does seem to be the sentiment that has been around this Kawhi thing since it broke. Like the idea that, yeah, this isn't all that uncommon of a practice. They just got caught. Though this is a breaking news story, so I'm sure there's gonna be plenty more to be said. In fact, the main issue with this deal seems to be a matter of disclosure, because in 2019, the owner of the Toronto Raptors personally called 3 different sponsors on Kawhi's behalf to get him an additional $15 million to return to Toronto. Apparently, that's fine. You can do it, as long as it's nothing under the table and it's a separate sponsor. It's not a sponsor that is paid for by the team owner, as it is in this case. Another factor is if said agreement is in fact a direct agreement or an implied one. For example, the whole reason that James Harden had his falling out with Daryl Morey, you know, the whole Daryl Morey is a liar thing, that was because he believed that he was going to get a longer, more lucrative extension after initially agreeing to a cheaper deal earlier into the relationship in Philadelphia. But because there isn't any direct documentation of such an agreement, it just ends up being he said, he said. Now, in the case of Kawhi, Ballmer, and the Clippers, this shit was caught in writing like red-handed.
In March 2025, this celebrity-endorsed, multi-billion-dollar, allegedly fraudulent tree brokerage named Aspiration, which promises to clear your conscience and your emissions, they file for bankruptcy. And this is where the clue is. What David's looking at with his glasses on is a bankruptcy filing, and there's a list of creditors. The entities to which Aspiration and all of their alleged fraudulence still owes the most money. And what I noticed is what David is noticing right now, which is that on that list of creditors, up near the top, above the Boston Red Sox, is an LLC, a tiny little company that Aspiration owes $7 million. And that LLC's name, David, is what?
KL2 Aspire LLC.
And what does it list there under manager or member name?
Kawhi Leonard.
Whose NBA jersey number, just to connect all of the dots here, happens to be what?
Number 2.
So then the question is, the Aspire part of KL2 Aspire LLC, right? Because, okay, he's getting all this money, millions of dollars. What I started doing was scour the internet for any mentions of Aspiration. Any appearances, tweets, quotes, Instagram posts, anything by Kawhi Leonard endorsing Aspiration. And this was hard to find, which also might seem weird, right? Because every other celebrity Aspiration gave money to was well known. There was Drake offering a statement to Rolling Stone. There was Doc Rivers, Kawhi's own head coach. Robert Downey Jr. was cutting his commercial. That was the whole point of paying the A-list Avengers. But the grand total number of times that I found Kawhi Leonard ever publicly referencing Aspiration, 0 times.
Right.
Kawhi Leonard mentioned Aspiration. And so what I started doing was reaching out to dozens of former Aspiration employees. A grand total of 7 of them ultimately agreed to interviews, which is also how I have exclusively obtained this signed and executed document.
In consideration of the rights and benefits granted to company hereunder, the company will pay KL2, which is Kawhi, $28 million in cash during the term of this agreement.
There is even a testimony from a person running this scam of an organization, specifically the financial sect of it all, and they're more or less saying that they were told that it was to circumvent the cap.
And I didn't so much as discover it as I was told about it.
What was your reaction? What were you told?
My reaction was, what the fuck? And I was told, like, oh, these are the major contracts and the major players you really need to be aware of. And we went through a litany of, really, really top tier name contracts. And then, oh, by the way, we also have a marketing deal with Kawhi Leonard, a $28 million organic marketing sponsorship deal with Kawhi. And that if I had any questions about it, essentially don't because it was to circumvent the salary cap. LOL.
There is actually a much larger story at play here that Kawhi just so happened to get caught up in between two Democratic politicians who are allegedly behind an over $2 billion scheme surrounding this tree planting company. They've hired a couple of different celebrity spokesmen and gotten a large percentage of their donation from Steve Ballmer. But in all of that, Kawhi gets $28 million for a no-show. Kawhi has never been seen in any promotional material, nor has he even as much as tweeted or posted on any social media about this company. He is getting $28 million for the price of signing the contract. Like, literally nothing besides for his signature got him that money. Well, at least if it was limited to just this, but of course this was a sweetener to get Kawhi to stick around, and that is an important detail in all of this, as this deal was penned in 2021, meaning that this isn't why Kawhi went to the Clippers, at least as far as we know, but perhaps it's why he stayed instead. But with what I previously mentioned about Toronto's owner fishing up $15 million in sponsors for him, he seemed puzzled as to why that wasn't enough for Kawhi. Seemingly, as far as he was aware, him and the Raptors could bring Kawhi in on a contract that was just as lucrative as what the Clippers did, plus he was getting him $15 million in sponsors. That kinda implies that the Clippers had a different under-the-table agreement from the very beginning of that relationship. Now, as of today, the punishment for circumventing the cap isn't quite as dire as it was back in 1999. Sam Quinn on Twitter was nice enough to look into the NBA's rules and found that the fine is, again, rather large, $4.5 million for a first offense and $5.5 million for a second one, but it would only result in the loss of one first-round pick, and I believe that comes down to one first-round pick per instance of being caught. If this ends up being a pattern of behavior, if this is something that has happened multiple times and it comes out that Kawhi has been getting under the table agreements since 2019, this could blow up the entire fucking organization from the inside out. Tons of scandal, tons of people being fired, tons of fines, contracts being voided, future draft picks being taken away. That's especially important for this Clippers team that is as old as it is. They probably only have a year, tops two, where they're not going to be blowing up the roster in terms of just trading everybody away. So if they end up getting not getting future draft picks in years that they would be tanking and rebuilding, that's going to set them back for years. Not to mention dealing with the court of public opinion and putting a stain on the franchise as a whole. This could get pretty damn ugly. And I also gotta say that this seems really like a necessary risk for the amount of money that this ends up being. It seems entirely unworth this amount of risk. And I also have to say that this kind of pisses me off. Actually, scratch the kinda. Forgive me, okay? I'm doing it again. Forgive me for getting on my anti-mega rich people soapbox again, but it is quite insulting in an American reality where more and more people are impoverished, where the cost of living has gone up 21% since 2020, to see someone make this kind of money for barely lifting a finger to sign the contract. It's also quite sinister that there is possibly over $2 billion wrapped up in this thing for what appears to be basically, possibly a money laundering operation. Again, all this shit is alleged as of now. I'll be happy to report more when new information comes when we have it. But while I have been saying for a while now that NBA contracts are just getting to an excessive amount of money, like no one needs that amount of money, same as the owners do not need that amount of money. This isn't me making a pro giving that money to the owners thing. At least, at the very least, for that crazy amount of money they're making to play basketball, they were getting contracted for their actual on-the-court play. At least it wasn't behind our backs, and again, ostensibly for doing nothing. This is also the biggest name ever associated with anything like this. Kevin McHale implied that this kind of thing happens all the time. And again, I've seen that sentiment around this particular story. I tend to believe that that is the case. But before Kawhi, the only well-documented instance was a center who played for 13 teams in 15 years, putting up role player numbers. I do really wonder how much this will all stick to Kawhi's legacy by the time we're on the other side of this story. Maybe it's just a footnote, or maybe this is even bigger than we can currently imagine. I don't know. I'm just tired of the games that the mega wealthy play. You've got enough, man. Fuck off. That is it. Thank you so much for watching. Shout out to Rudy for editing this one, and goodbye.